in Nature last year. Well, where this is taking us is a world where the successful businesses take their values from their customers, their designs from nature, and their discipline from the marketplace. All the things that genetically modified crops forgot to do, which is why they came unstuck in the market. And it's a world where conventional environmental regulation starts to seem rather unnecessary because in most cases, the firms that need it will already be out of business, having spent too much money making things that nobody wants. Things that in the 20th century we used to call wastes and emissions. Now we have a better name. We call it unsaleable production, because this focuses our minds immediately on why are we making something nobody wants? Why don't we just stop producing it? Let's design it out. And that way comes real innovation. Of course, you get there faster with proper feedback, and systems without feedback are stupid by definition. For example, I've sometimes wondered how clean a the provider and the customer make money in exactly the same way by doing more and better with less for longer. How do you do that? Well, if you travel to, say, Europe or Asia, you'll probably see a lot of good Swiss elevators made by a company called Schindler. They don't want to sell you an elevator. What they would really rather do is lease you a vertical transportation service. The reason is that they think their elevators need less electricity and maintenance than competing ones. Therefore, if they own the elevator and they pay its running costs, they pay less. So they can more cheaply and profitably provide you what you really wanted, which was not a bunch of metal, but the service of being moved up and down. And the more efficient and durable the elevators get, the more money you both make. Dow, similarly, would rather not sell you a solvent. They'd rather lease you a dissolving service. And it's a much better deal for both of you. Because afterwards, when they take the solvent back, you never own it, that's good, they repurify it. And if they can put it through 50 or 100 round trips and not lose much each time, obviously the cost of dissolving goes way down. So they can charge you less but make more profit. They get market share, you get lower costs, everybody wins. In fact, in Germany, they're paid for how many square centimeters of parts they degrease rather than how many liters of solvent it takes to do it. So if they use the solvent more productively, or better still, they figure out how to keep your parts from getting greasy in the first place so you don't need a solvent, they get paid for that too. So part of the trick here is achieving a level of customer intimacy that lets the provider anticipate the customer's evolving value needs. And where that takes us is a world where when you try to sell somebody a product whose use produces the service they really wanted, a smart customer is going to say, why are you trying to sell me this product? If it had the operational advantages you claim for it, you'd want to get those yourself by keeping the product and just leasing me the service. So why are you trying to sell me this thing? There must be something wrong with it. Let me give you an example of how these principles all tie together. It has to do with this stuff on the floor, this carpet, broadloom carpet made of oil. And you know, you put it down, and after 10 or 20 years, parts of it look kind of worn. So you have to close down your office, move out all the furniture, roll up partly worn carpet, which we do by millions of tons a year, send it to landfill for 10 or 20,000 years, not a great use of oil or money. Meanwhile, back at the office, you put down fresh carpet, move back in, resume operations, maybe get sick from the fumes in carpet glue. Does this sound like a very intelligent procedure? Well, Ray Anderson didn't think so when he founded Interface, $1.5 billion interior furnishings company. And he's been making them gradually into a natural capitalist company. He's already got about 165 million bucks through last year added to the bottom line by systematically wringing out waste, which now includes fossil fuel. And that provides 27% of the firm's operating profits. Not bad for starters. They were the company that did the big pipe, small pumps. I believe we just had about a 90% saving on an industrial air conditioning system with $1.5 million less capital cost or thereabouts. Lots of neat examples. Then the next step is principle 2, closed loop non-toxic production. Well, here's their new floor covering material, selenium, which contains nothing toxic, no chlorine, so you don't worry what happens in a fire. It's independently certified that all the climate impact of making and delivering and maintaining it is offset before it got to you. You can wash it off with a garden hose, but it doesn't stain, it doesn't mildew, has good aesthetics and acoustics and comfort underfoot. It's also 4 times as durable as the previous ordinary carpet and uses a third less material. So those two things mean that you're using 7 times less raw material flow to cover a square yard for a year. And for the first time, you can completely remanufacture this stuff into identical product with no loss of quality. So then the next logical step is to make the transition from selling carpet to leasing floor covering services. Because after all, you don't really want to own a carpet, you just want to walk on it and look at it. It doesn't do any good sitting on your balance sheet. So they deliver the carpet in the European fashion of carpet tiles. In fact, the latest patterns have the biomimicry feature of a pattern that looks like leaves on a forest floor. You know, if you pick up a leaf, you can't tell it's not there anymore, and then you can't tell where the edge of the carpet tiles are. But what happens then is that every month the little elves come in the night and inspect your carpet tiles, and they take away only the worn ones, which is only 1/5 of them. And the 4/5 that aren't worn, they leave there. So that's another factor 5 reduction in materials flow. Multiply that times the previous factor 7, and you got a factor 35 reduction in materials flow. That's 97% less stuff. To keep your floor always looking fresh, which is a better service than you had before. And think about this from the perspective of a conventional company that makes and sells carpet. How are they going to compete with a company that uses 97% less raw material? In fact, 1,000 times less raw material by the time you start remanufacturing the worn tiles that went back to the factory. Now you can do that too. And it needs 1/10 as much capital, and it provides a better service at a lower cost and a higher margin, and it's even tax deductible to the customer as an operating lease, as opposed to an idle balance sheet item. How do you do that? Well, you can't. You can't compete with that kind of a stunning breakthrough in advantage. And by the way, they actually employ more people delivering the service than they lose jobs at the factory making less carpet. So they're substituting abundant people for scarce nature. The 4th step, which is now underway, is to make this stuff not out of natural gas, but out of, say, corn cobs, and then buy the corn cobs from, say, poor African-American farmers in the Deep South, using organic techniques, preserving soil and rural culture and rural economy, and getting paid by carbon brokers for taking carbon out of the air and putting it back in the topsoil where it belongs. So that's a nice reinvestment in both human and natural capital. This is a rather profitable way to run a carpet company, if you think of it as a carpet company. The first 4 years on this new tack, the company more than doubled its revenues, more than tripled its operating profits, and nearly doubled its employment all at the same time. And I was actually there when the designer of Selenium, David Oakey, wandered in with this dreamy expression, having just figured out how to do this impossible thing. He said, you know, God must be an environmentalist. As soon as we figured out what questions to ask, it all fell into place. We got every attribute we wanted, and none we didn't want, and a bunch of cool stuff we never thought to ask for. That's a pretty typical result when you get the design problem properly stated. And then they found the workers got really excited about this because there was no longer a contradiction between what they were doing on the job and what they wanted for their kids when they went home. And when that happens, neither the managers nor the competitors can keep up. Let's just review where we got to. we extract from the earth, from natural capital, things that are grown and things that are mined. And the mining actually does some damage to the fertility that lets us grow things, so there's a bit of internal contradiction there. This 500 billion or so tons of stuff a year goes into manufacturing, which produces both products and wastes. And then once we use the products, or even before we use the products, they are disposed of, and that waste comes back to the planet. There's no other place to put it. Or we could actually recycle, remanufacture, and reuse things, or compost them so they're food for nature. Now, the way it actually works in the current system is something like this, that we mine much more than we grow, and of the 500 billion tons a year we take out of nature, about 93% is promptly lost in extraction and manufacturing. Only about 7% leaks through into products, of which about 6/7 are thrown away promptly after one use or no uses. Those are consumer ephemerals. About 1% hangs around for a little while as durable products, and then when they're disposed of, about 98% gets thrown away, and only about 2% comes back to make value. So this system's about 99.98% pure waste, a very good business opportunity. Moreover, of the stuff we throw away, one way or another, a lot of that's toxic, so when it comes back into nature, it damages the regenerative capacity we need to grow things and to have ecosystem services, without which, again, there is no life and no economic activity. So this is not a sensible design. Let's change it. In a natural capitalist system, we would grow more and mine less of what we take. And we would take out of nature a great deal less, thanks to comprehensive resource productivity gains all over this right-hand side, including closing the loops in manufacturing and after use, dematerializing products, making them last longer, harvesting and extracting much more efficiently, so there's very little waste down here. And as we systematically design out waste, we also design out toxicity, so the little bit of waste that comes back to nature is no longer damaging regenerative capacity, which on the contrary, we deliberately increase by reinvesting some of the financial profit we made on the right-hand side by getting rid of waste. So that's how all the four principles fit together and why you really need all four of them. That gets me to the last one, which is the easiest one, because nature does the production when you reinvest in natural capital. You just need to get out of the way and allow life to flourish wherever it wants to, and it's very good at that after 3.8 billion years, filling every niche. And generally, the people who have learned first to treat nature as model and measure and mentor rather than as a nuisance to be evaded are the foresters, farmers, ranchers, fishers, the folks whose success depends very much on the health of the nature around them. So, for example, the Rhodesian wildlife biologist Alan Savory figured out that in dry, brittle lands in the West that we thought were overgrazed like this, typically they were actually undergrazed, but grazed the wrong way. And if you carefully redesign the grazing pattern to mimic the natural coevolution of grass and grazers, the grass comes back, and you greatly increase carrying capacity. Or in California, instead of burning the rice straw after harvest and maybe causing silicosis downwind, many of the farmers have started to flood the fields after harvest, and then they invite in millions of ducks and geese, which provide free fertilizer and cultivation and lucrative hunting licenses. The straw that was previously burned and caused an air pollution problem is now a high-value construction material because the silica content makes it hard for bugs to eat. You get paid for recharging the groundwater. Oh, yeah, you're still selling rice, but now as a byproduct of these other lucrative co-products. And in fact, you make so much more money this way that a third of the rice growing area has switched over to this system, which again mimics how natural rice growing works. Or there's Wes Jackson's work at the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas, transforming Great Plains agriculture from a monoculture of annuals to a polyculture of perennials modeled on the prairie, because it works a whole lot better than anything else we can grow there. Or John Todd's work, turning raw sewage and septage in these indoor engineered ecosystems into tertiary water and flowers with no chlorine or hazard or toxicity or odor. This is right in the middle of a residential area in Maryland, I believe. The only problem with these things is they attract tourists. And of course, you can reinvest not just in, but with natural capital. Gunter Pauli at ZERI, Zero Emissions Research Initiative, on the web at zeri.org, has a bunch of nice examples. Here's one. He points out that 1 billion people have no, and yet many of those live in places where one of the 1,300 kinds of bamboo grows rapidly, and bamboo is stronger than steel and can do 8-meter overhangs. Well, the Colombian architect Simon Benez has figured out how to take 100 pieces of bamboo 5 meters long and turn them into a strong, beautiful house. And you can grow that much bamboo every 5 years on just 100 square meters of bamboo thicket. Also, if you put in a cement slab and other amenities, the cost of the house in cash is about $1,700. How do you pay for that? Well, you smoke the bamboo before you build the house with ancient Japanese or other techniques that bring acid out to the surface so bugs don't eat it, and it's good for 500 years. And then the byproduct charcoal from that pyrolysis is actually quite a good cooking fuel, saving more deforestation. But it turns out that when you're growing the bamboo scraps to do the smoking and the structural bamboo to build the house, you're sequestering so much carbon that you can sell that sequestration to a broker for, guess what, about $1,700. So you grow your own house, and it's self-financing, and it protects the climate. Not bad. Now, this same kind of getting multiple benefits for single expenditures can work at the scale of a whole city or society. And my favorite chapter in our book, the next to last one, is the story of Curitiba, Brazil. A city the size of Philadelphia or Houston, 2.5 million, quadrupled population in the past 20 years, and the city's budget per person is about 15 times smaller than that of Detroit. This does not sound very promising. But actually, it worked out very well because in a brilliant design process led largely by architects and largely by women, for 30 years now, they've treated their formidable social and economic and ecological needs not as competing priorities to be traded off, departments fighting over budget, but as integrated, interlinked design elements with synergies to be captured. So from the beginning, they integrated hydrology and landform, nutrient and waste flows, transport and land use, education and health, participation and dignity, and created one of the world's great cities by design. It's not paradise. Some problems. When I was there recently, they actually started to have graffiti for the first time. Turned out to be middle-aged kids wanting attention, so I think they hired them as urban artists. But it has handled its problems better than any North American city I know by design integration and by getting the feedback right. See, the heavy lifting was done largely by the private sector, but the rules are very simple and clear and reward what you want, not the opposite. So if you cut down a tree, you need a license to do that. You got to plant 2 trees. It's real clear. Everybody understands that. If you are an industry in the industrial zone and you make solid waste, you have to dispose of it on your own land. There is no way to throw it. It's a very good incentive not to make it. And in what is widely considered the world's leading public transport system, the 10 competing private companies that run that are paid not for carrying people, but for serving route length, so that they have an incentive to spread out fairly and serve everybody in the city. Well, in the world today, over half of the 100 biggest economic entities are not countries, they're companies. So we are very fortunate that companies, perhaps uniquely among our institutions, have the leadership, management, resources, skills, agility, innovation, motivation to solve tough problems quickly. And the companies that are early adopting these 4 operational principles, we give hundreds of examples of this in the book, are finding amazing competitive advantage. As Ed Willard said when he chaired DuPont, companies that take such opportunities seriously will do very well, while yet those that don't won't be a problem, because ultimately they won't be around. Maybe the big problem with capitalism, this extraordinary system of wealth creation based on the productive use of and reinvestment in capital, all 4 forms of capital, is that we're only just now starting to try it. But the early returns are very encouraging. I would invite you to visit on the web naturalcapitalism.org, or for short, natcap.org, where you can download the book for free. Free is cool. You can download for free a Harvard Business Review article. It's the kind of Cliff's Notes version of the basic business logic, and a lot of other neat stuff. And I hope that you will contribute your own examples, your own cases to this of what worked or what didn't work, so we can accelerate the rapidly growing conversation about this new way of doing business, as if nature and people were properly valued, but without needing to know or signal what they're actually worth. Thank you for your kind attention.
Questions, and I'd just like to ask that you take the opportunity to really ask questions as opposed to posing debate. And the second piece is, if you have a follow-up question, if you wouldn't mind holding it in case others would like an opportunity to ask one as well. And Jane is here with the microphone, which again we ask you to speak into. She'll run around for you so we can get your question onto our videotape. We have a gentleman right there.
Thank you for coming to Rhode Island. I was on your site the other day and noticed that someone who had read the book sent it to every member of Congress. And I was curious what your vision of the government's role in moving us in the direction of natural capitalism.
There was a period when I was personally tempted to do a bumper sticker called Progress Opposite of Congress. I think that may be starting to change. We certainly have a uniquely teachable moment right now. It would certainly be a lot easier if all three elements of society, that is civil society, government, and business, were fully aligned on these issues. All three, I think, have a very important role to play. As you may have gathered, I think most of what we need to do will actually work well in the market if we allow the market to work, rather than bailing out our favorite turkeys and trying to block things that beat them because we don't happen to like those things, like, say, efficiency or renewables. The states are a great laboratory for this sort of thing, and Rhode Island has done some very good things in sensible energy policy. There's more to do, but it's made a good start. It's always a bit more difficult in Congress, but we get the sort of government that we deserve. As Andy Lipkis used to say, governments do either what you want them to do or what they think you don't care if they do. Let me just try a little experiment. How many of you in the past month have written to your members of Congress? The rest of you know who you are. They also, as Andy says, they can't help stamping on your toes now and then if they don't know where your toes are. But of course, you can always stop back at election time because you always know where their toes are. I think a lot of what we need to do is in government is in the realm of barrier busting. It is, for example, silly that in 49 or soon 48 of the United States, because California is coming back to the system, we reward utilities for selling more energy and penalize them for cutting your bill. Why are we rewarding the opposite of what we want? Or why are we paying architects and engineers for what they spend, not for what they save? Or why do we make it so hard in most states to connect small renewable generators to the grid? This shouldn't require a special engineering study. We should go with the, say, New York or Texas system, and if you're using any of the approved list of interfaces, you just plug it in. God bless you, you don't even need to ask permission. If you meet the National Electrical Code and Underwriters Lab and IEEE, nothing further should be required of you, because that's all that's needed to protect everybody. Let's make it simple. There are 34 states now where you can sell power from small producers back to the utility at the same price they charge you. It's called net metering. Everybody should do that. This is not very complicated stuff. And I think there are some very important policy initiatives that could be tried at a state level but really ought to go to a national level. And let me mention one. When you buy a new car or bus or heavy truck or aircraft, commercial aircraft, it ought to be on a fee-based system. That's a combination of a fee and a rebate. That means if what you buy is less efficient than normal, you pay a fee. Less efficient it is, the bigger the fee. But if it's more efficient than normal, instead of paying a fee, you get a rebate. The more efficient it is, the bigger the rebate. And each year the fees pay for the rebates. Read my lips, not a new tax. It's just a transfer of wealth from people whose inefficient choices impose social costs to those whose efficient choices save social costs. The reason I'm picking on cars is in part that we're paying over $100 a barrel for Persian Gulf oil when you count the $50 billion a year for military readiness costs for intervention in the Persian Gulf. But we pay that through our taxes, not at the gas pump. And I'd much rather have neg emissions in the Gulf, mission unnecessary. Now, it doesn't take much to get us off Persian Gulf oil. 2.7 miles per gallon on the light vehicle fleet would do it. We used to do that every 3 years when we were paying attention. I think fee-bates would do it even faster if you add a kicker called accelerated scrappage, or a scrap and trade system. So when you get a rebate for your efficient new car, how big that rebate is depends on the difference in efficiency between the new car you buy and the old car you scrap, so that nobody will ever drive it again. So we get the worst cars off the road quickest, which has very disproportionate benefits for air and oil and climate, the national